Ekena was a young girl with a kind heart and a gentle spirit. She had the most beautiful hair anyone had ever seen, long, thick, and shining like strands of pure silk. But what made her hair truly special was that it was magical. It grew faster and stronger than anyone else's, and no matter how it was cut or styled, it always returned to its full glory. Ekena lived in a small village with her father and her stepmother Nkem. Her father loved her dearly and did his best to take care of her, but he was often busy working in the fields. He had remarried after Ekena's mother passed away, hoping that Nkem would be a loving mother to his daughter. However, Nkem was not the kind woman he had hoped for. On the outside, she smiled and acted kindly, but deep inside, she despised Ekena. Whenever the villagers praised Ekena's beauty, especially her thick, flowing hair, Nkem's jealousy burned like fire. She couldn't understand why a simple girl like Ekena was so admired, while her own daughter, Zuena, never received such attention. Though Nkem never showed her true feelings openly, her heart was filled with envy and bitterness. She pretended to care for Ekena, but in secret, she was looking for a way to bring her down. When Ekena was just a little girl, her mother passed away, leaving behind a deep emptiness in her heart. She barely remembered her mother's face, but she could still feel the warmth of her embrace and the softness of her voice. Without her, life felt different, quieter, lonelier. Her father, though strong, was heartbroken. He tried his best to care for Ekena, but he was often busy working in the fields to provide for them. As time went on, her father began to worry. Ekena needed a mother's love, someone to brush her hair, teach her the ways of the village, and guide her as she grew. He believed that a woman's presence in their home would bring warmth and happiness again. So, after much thought, he decided to remarry. That was when Nkem came into their lives. At first, Ekena was hopeful. She wanted so badly to have a mother again, someone to hold her when she was scared, to tell her stories at night, and to braid her long, thick hair the way her real mother used to. She tried her best to be kind and respectful to Nkem, believing that if she was good, maybe Nkem would love her. But things did not go the way she had hoped. Though Nkem smiled in front of her father and the villagers, there was something cold about her. When they were alone, she barely spoke to Ekena, and when she did, her voice lacked warmth. At first, Ekena thought she had done something wrong. She tried harder to please Nkem, but no matter what she did, the woman never truly welcomed her with open arms. Ekena didn't know why, but deep in her heart, she felt it. Nkem was not like her real mother. She did not love her. At first, Nkem acted kindly toward Ekena, smiling when others were watching and speaking gently when her husband was around. But deep inside, jealousy burned in her heart like a hidden fire. Every time she looked at Ekena's long, thick, and beautiful hair, she felt anger rise within her. The villagers never stopped talking about Ekena's hair. Women in the market whispered about how silky and full it was. The older women admired its length, saying it was a blessing from the ancestors. Even the young girls in the village wished their hair could be as long and beautiful as Ekena's. Whenever she walked through the village, heads turned, and people couldn't help but praise her beauty. This made Nkem furious. She couldn't understand why a girl like Ekena, who wasn't even her own daughter, was getting all the attention. Meanwhile, her own daughter, Zuena, was always overlooked. No one talked about Zuena's beauty. No one praised her hair. Nkem started to believe it was unfair. Day by day, her jealousy grew stronger. She hid it well, smiling at Ekena in front of others, pretending to be a caring stepmother. But behind closed doors, her eyes darkened with resentment. She hated hearing the villagers compare Ekena to a princess while her own daughter was ignored. Nkem began to wish that Ekena's beauty would disappear. She started thinking of ways to make sure no one would ever admire Ekena again. And soon, that jealousy would turn into something far more dangerous. Nkem's jealousy had grown too strong to hide. She could no longer pretend to be kind. Every time she saw Ekena's long, beautiful hair flowing behind her, she felt nothing but hatred. The villagers' praises echoed in her mind, making her anger worse. She wanted to bring Ekena down, to make her feel small and unimportant. Slowly, Nkem began to show her true colors. She stopped treating Ekena like a daughter and turned her into a servant. From morning till night, Ekena was given the hardest chores. sweeping every corner of the house, scrubbing the floors until they shined, fetching heavy pots of water from the river, and cooking meals for the entire family. Her hands became rough, her feet ached, and yet she never complained. But while Ikenna worked like a slave, Zuena, Nkem's own daughter, lived like a princess. She never had to do any chores. Nkem dressed her in the finest clothes, fed her the best food, and braided her hair with colourful beads. While Ikenna ate cold leftovers in the kitchen, Zuena sat comfortably, enjoying warm, delicious meals. Ikenna could feel the unfairness, but she kept her pain hidden. She missed her real mother's gentle touch, the way she used to sing to her while brushing her hair. But now, no one cared for her. No one defended her. She was all alone in a house where she was unwanted. But deep inside, Ikenna's spirit remained strong. No matter how much Nkem mistreated her, she refused to let her heart turn cold. She held on to hope, not knowing that something even worse was coming her way. The night was dark and silent. The only sound in the house was the soft breeze rustling through the windows. Ikenna lay fast asleep, exhausted from a long day of endless chores. Her long, thick hair spread across the pillow like a river of silk, shining even in the dim moonlight. But in the shadows, Nkem stood watching. Her heart pounded with jealousy. Every day, she had to hear the villagers praise Ikenna's beauty. Every day, she had to watch as people admired the girl's magical hair. It made her furious. She had tried everything to make Ikenna feel small, but nothing worked. Tonight, that would change. With shaky hands, Nkem picked up a sharp pair of scissors. She tiptoed toward the bed, her eyes burning with resentment. Slowly, she reached out and grabbed a handful of Ikenna's thick hair. It felt soft. Perfect. Too perfect. With a wicked smile, she raised the scissors and snip! The first cut was deep. Thick strands of hair fell to the floor, curling like lifeless vines. Nkem's eyes gleamed with excitement. She grabbed more and snip! Snip! Cut again and again, her hands moving faster, her heart racing. She didn't stop until all of Ikenna's beautiful hair lay scattered on the ground. Satisfied, she stepped back and admired her work. The girl who once had the most admired hair in the village now had nothing but uneven patches on her head. Nkem let out a cruel laugh. The next morning, Ikenna woke up feeling strange. Something was wrong. She reached up to touch her hair, but it was gone. Her breath caught in her throat. Her fingers moved frantically over her head, searching for the long locks that had always been there. But all she felt was rough, uneven patches of hair. Her heart started pounding. Tears welled up in her eyes. Just then, Nkem walked in with a wicked smile. She crossed her arms and smirked. "Now you are just like everyone else," she said coldly. Then, without a second thought, she turned and walked away, leaving Ikenna sitting there in shock, staring at the strands of hair scattered on the floor. Her world had just shattered. But what Nkem didn't know was that something extraordinary was about to happen. Ikenna sat on the floor, staring at the hair scattered around her. Tears streamed down her face as she ran her hands over her uneven, rough patches. She felt empty, broken. Her hair had always been special, a part of her identity. Now, it was gone. For the next few days, Ikenna barely spoke. She covered her head with a scarf, avoiding everyone. The villagers who used to admire her beauty now looked at her with pity. Some whispered about what had happened, but no one dared to question Nkem. Ikenna felt alone, as if the world had turned against her. But then, something unbelievable happened. One morning, as Ikenna removed her scarf to wash her face, she gasped. Tiny strands of hair had started growing back, faster than she had ever seen before. By the next day, the strands had become longer and thicker. Within a few more days, her hair had grown past her shoulders, stronger and fuller than before. It shimmered in the sunlight, as if touched by magic. When Ikenna stepped outside, the villagers were stunned. They gathered around her, their eyes wide with amazement. "Look, her hair is back," one woman gasped. "And it's even longer than before," another whispered. "This is not normal," an elder murmured. "It must be a gift from the ancestors." The news spread quickly. People came from different parts of the village just to see the miracle with their own eyes. They touched her hair in awe, whispering blessings and praises. But not everyone was happy. Nkem stood at a distance, her fists clenched, her heart burning with rage. "How is this possible?" she muttered under her breath. She had cut off all of Ekenna's hair, certain that it would humble her, make her feel ordinary. But now, the girl was even more admired than before. Nkem's jealousy, which had been strong before, now turned into something far more dangerous. She realized that cutting Ekenna's hair once was not enough. This time, she needed to destroy it completely. Nkem could feel the villagers slipping away from her. Before, she had been respected, admired as the wife of a good man. But now, all anyone talked about was Ekenna and her miracle hair. The more they praised the girl, the more Nkem's jealousy turned to hatred. She could not allow Ekenna to shine. She had to make sure no one ever looked at her with admiration again. One morning, as Ekenna finished sweeping the front yard, Nkem stormed toward her, holding a long dull scarf in her hands. Her eyes were cold and sharp. "From now on, you will cover your hair," she ordered, throwing the scarf at Ekenna. "I don't want to see it. No one else should see it either." Ekenna looked up in shock. "But why, stepmother?" she asked, her voice trembling. Nkem's lips curled into a cruel smirk. "Because it is unnatural. It makes people talk. And I don't like it." Ekenna's hands shook as she picked up the scarf. She did not want to hide her hair. It was the one thing that made her feel connected to her mother, to the ancestors. But she knew that arguing with Nkem would only bring more trouble. With a heavy heart, she wrapped the scarf around her head, covering every strand of her magical hair. But Nkem was not done. "And you will no longer attend village gatherings," she added. "I don't want you drawing attention to yourself." Ekenna's heart sank. The village gatherings were the only time she felt like she belonged, where she could listen to stories, dance, and laugh with others. Now she was being shut away, hidden like a secret. Zuwina, who had been watching from a distance, burst into laughter. "Look at you now," she sneered. "You think you're special, but Mother is right. You're just a cursed girl. That's why your hair is so strange." Ekenna felt her chest tighten, but she refused to cry in front of them. She lowered her head and turned away, feeling smaller than ever. As the days passed, she became a shadow in her own home. While Zuwena dressed in fine clothes and attended feasts, Ekenna stayed behind, doing chores in silence. She was no longer the girl the villagers admired. She was just a servant, a forgotten soul wrapped in an old scarf. But deep inside, she knew the truth. She was not cursed. She was not ordinary. And soon, the world would see it again. Nkem could no longer control her rage. Every time she saw Ekenna, even with the scarf covering her head, she felt sick with jealousy. She knew deep inside that the girl's beauty was still there, waiting to shine again. The villagers still whispered about her, still looked at her with admiration. It made Nkem furious. "This must end," she muttered to herself, once and for all. That night, while the house was silent, Nkem made her move. She crept into Ekenna's small room, just as she had done before. But this time, she didn't bring scissors. She brought a sharp razor. Her hands trembled with excitement as she pulled off Ekenna's scarf. Even in the dim moonlight, she could see that the girl's hair had grown back longer and thicker than ever. With a wicked grin, Nkem grabbed Ekenna's head and swipe! The first strip of hair fell to the ground. The sound of the razor slicing through the thick strands was smooth and sharp, like a knife through silk. Nkem worked quickly, determined to erase every trace of Ekenna's beauty. Ekenna stirred in her sleep. A strange chill ran down her spine, but she was too exhausted to wake up. Swipe! Swipe! More hair tumbled to the floor, forming dark, lifeless piles around her. Nkem's breath came out in fast, excited gasps. Soon there was nothing left. Ekenna's head was completely bald. She looked so different, so ordinary, so powerless. But Nkem wasn't done. This time, she would make sure the hair never returned. She gathered the thick strands into a bundle, took them outside, and set them on fire. The flames roared, eating away at the magical locks, turning them into ash. Smoke curled into the sky, and Nkem smiled in satisfaction. "This time, it's over," she whispered. The next morning, when Ekenna woke up, she felt a strange lightness on her head. Slowly, she reached up and froze. Her hair was gone, completely gone. She jumped out of bed, rushing to the small mirror in the corner of the room. The reflection staring back at her was unrecognizable. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She already knew who had done this. Nkem stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her lips curled in triumph. "There," she said coldly. "Now, let's see if your magic works this time." Zuena peeked from behind her mother and let out a laugh. "You look ridiculous," she mocked. "No one will call you beautiful now." Ekenna's heart ached, but she did not speak. She did not beg. She did not cry. She simply looked at them, her eyes filled with quiet strength, because deep inside, she knew something they didn't. This was not the end. And very soon, Nkem would regret ever laying a hand on her. Ekenna sat in silence, running her fingers over her smooth, bare scalp. The cold air touched her skin, but she refused to shiver. She refused to show weakness. Deep inside, she held on to hope, hope that Nkem could never destroy what was meant to be. Days passed, and something strange began to happen. Tiny strands of hair sprouted from her head, growing faster than ever before. By the second day, they were thick and soft. By the third day, they reached her shoulders, and by the end of the week, her hair had grown all the way down to her waist, longer, fuller, and shinier than it had ever been. The moment she stepped outside, gasps filled the air. Villagers dropped what they were doing, their eyes wide with amazement. They whispered to each other, pointing at Ekenna as if she were a goddess. "Her hair has returned again," one woman said in awe. "It's even more beautiful than before." The news spread quickly, reaching the ears of Elder Badu, the wisest man in the village. He had heard of Ekenna's hair before, but now he needed to see it with his own eyes. With his long staff in hand, he made his way to Ekenna's home, his face serious and thoughtful. When he arrived, the crowd parted, making way for him. Ekenna stood still, her long hair flowing behind her like a river of silk. Elder Badu examined her carefully, his wise old eyes filled with curiosity. He reached out, letting the strands slip through his fingers, feeling their strange, powerful energy. "This is no ordinary hair," he finally said, his voice deep and steady. "This is a gift from the ancestors, a blessing that must not be harmed." The villagers nodded, murmuring in agreement, but Nkem, standing in the shadows, clenched her fists. Her plan had failed once again, and now the entire village was watching. Elder Badu turned to Ekenna and spoke gently. "Child, your hair is a sign of great destiny. You must be protected." Ekenna looked up at him, hope flickering in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment everything would change. But Nkem's face darkened with rage, and deep inside, Ekenna knew. Her stepmother was not finished yet. Elder Badu stood before Ekenna, his wise eyes filled with wonder. He had seen many things in his long life, but never had he witnessed a miracle like this. He ran his fingers through Ekenna's thick, flowing hair, feeling its strange energy. It was warm, alive, almost as if it carried the whispers of the ancestors themselves. The villagers gathered around, holding their breath as the elder spoke. "This is no ordinary hair," he said, his deep voice echoing through the air. "This is a sacred gift, passed down by the ancestors. Ekenna is not just another child, she is chosen for a great destiny." Gasps spread through the crowd. People looked at Ekenna with newfound respect, some even bowing their heads in reverence. Mothers pulled their children closer, whispering that they were standing in the presence of someone truly special, but not everyone was amazed. Nkem's face twisted in fury. She had spent years trying to make Ekenna feel small, to strip away her beauty, to erase the magic that made her stand out. And yet, here she was, stronger, more admired than ever. Elder Badu turned to Nkem, his sharp gaze pinning her in place. "I know what you have done," he said. His voice was calm, but there was power in his words. "You have tried to destroy this child again and again, but you cannot fight fate." Nkem swallowed hard, but she refused to look away. "She is just a girl," she said, forcing a laugh. "This is nothing but a trick." Elder Badu raised his hand, silencing her. "Harming Ekenna is no small act," he warned. "If you try to hurt her again, you will bring a curse upon yourself. The ancestors protect her, and if you stand against her, you stand against them." A heavy silence fell over the crowd. The villagers glanced at each other, murmuring in fear. No one dared to go against the ancestors. Their power was real, their punishments unforgiving. Nkem felt the weight of their stares, the fear creeping into her own heart, but instead of backing down, she clenched her fists. She would not let some old man and his superstitions scare her. She still had one last trick up her sleeve. Ekena, standing tall with her magical hair flowing behind her, could feel it. This was far from over. Nkem could not accept it. She could not believe that Ekena, the girl she had tried so hard to break, was now more powerful and admired than ever. The villagers whispered about her hair, calling it a gift from the ancestors. Elder Badu had warned her to stop, but Nkem's jealousy burned too deep. She refused to let Ekena win. Late that night, when everyone was asleep, Nkem crept into Ekena's room once more. This time, she carried a sharp knife. She had tried scissors before, but they had failed. This time, she would make sure the hair never returned. She would cut it from the root, destroy it completely. Ekena lay peacefully, her long hair spread around her like a river of silk. Nkem grabbed a handful of it and raised the knife, ready to slice. But the moment the cold blade touched Ekena's hair, something strange happened. A sharp pain shot through Nkem's scalp. She gasped, dropping the knife as she clutched her head. It felt as if invisible hands were pulling at her hair, yanking it from the roots. Panic filled her chest as strands of her own hair began falling, drifting to the floor like dead leaves. No, this can't be happening, she cried, frantically running her fingers through her hair. But the more she touched it, the more it came loose. Thick clumps tumbled down her shoulders, covering the ground in dark, lifeless strands. Ekena stirred awake and opened her eyes. She watched in shock as Nkem collapsed to her knees, desperately trying to hold onto the hair that was now abandoning her. Within moments, her head was completely bald, shiny, smooth, and empty. The villagers, awakened by her screams, rushed to see what was happening. Gasps filled the air as they took in the sight of Nkem, shivering and hairless, on the floor. Elder Badu stepped forward, his face grave. "You were warned," he said. "The ancestors do not tolerate cruelty. You tried to take from Ekena, but instead, you have lost everything." Tears streamed down Nkem's face as she touched her bare scalp. She had wanted to take away Ekena's beauty, but now, she had lost her own. The villagers murmured in disapproval, shaking their heads at her foolishness. Even Zuwena, her own daughter, took a step back in fear and shame. Ekena rose from her bed, her glowing hair untouched, her power stronger than ever. She looked at Nkem, not with anger, but with pity. The stepmother had tried to destroy her, but in the end, she had only destroyed herself. And now, the whole village had seen the truth. The morning after Nkem's downfall, the village was buzzing with whispers. People gathered outside Ekena's home, speaking in hushed voices about what had happened. Everyone had seen the power of her hair, the punishment of her stepmother, and the warning from Elder Badu. One thing was clear: Ekena was no ordinary girl. She was chosen. She was special. Elder Badu knew that as long as she stayed in this house, she would never be safe. Nkem might be defeated for now, but jealousy is like a fire. It can always rise again. So he made a decision. Ekena must leave, he announced to the villagers. She must go to a place where no one can harm her, where she can grow into her true destiny. Ekena's heart was heavy. She had spent her whole life in this village. But deep inside, she knew the elder was right. She could not stay in a place where her stepmother had tried to destroy her over and over again. If she was meant for something greater, she had to find out what that was. The villagers, once simply amazed by her hair, now looked at her with deep respect. Some bowed as she passed, others whispered blessings for her journey. Even those who once ignored her now understood. They had witnessed a miracle, and they would never forget it. With Elder Badu leading the way, Ekena walked toward a new beginning. The road ahead was unknown, but for the first time in her life, she was free. Free from cruelty, free from jealousy, free to become who she was meant to be. And as she walked away, her long, magical hair flowed behind her like a golden river, shining in the sunlight, a sign that her true story was only just beginning. After Ekena left, Nkem's world crumbled around her. The once proud woman who held her head high now walked through the village like a shadow of her former self. She had lost everything: her power, her beauty, her influence, and worst of all, her respect. The villagers no longer greeted her with smiles. When she passed by, they turned their backs. Women whispered about her behind their hands. Some laughed at her bald head, while others shook their heads in disgust. She brought this upon herself, they murmured. She tried to destroy a child blessed by the ancestors, and now she is the one cursed. At the market, sellers refused to give her the best goods. Some even ignored her completely, treating her like she was invisible. The woman who once strutted through the village, full of arrogance, now had to beg for the simplest kindness, but kindness never came. The worst betrayal, however, came from her own daughter, Zuena. Nkem had always favoured her, spoiling her with the best clothes and treating her like a princess. But now, Zuena wanted nothing to do with her. One evening, as Nkem sat outside their home, staring into the distance, Zuena approached with a scowl. "Because of you, everyone mocks me," she spat. "They say I am the daughter of a cursed woman." Nkem reached for her, but Zuena pulled away. "I don't want to be like you," she hissed. "You ruined everything. I wish I had never been your daughter." Those words shattered what little was left of Nkem's pride. She watched in silence as Zuena stormed away, leaving her completely alone. Days turned into weeks, and the loneliness became unbearable. Her once grand house felt empty, cold. The silence of rejection surrounded her like a heavy cloak. Meanwhile, news of Ekena spread far beyond the village. People spoke of the girl with magical hair, the girl blessed by the ancestors. She was no longer the mistreated stepdaughter. She had become something greater, a healer, a protector, a symbol of hope. Ekena flourished in her new life. She was surrounded by love, by people who saw her worth. She no longer had to hide her hair. She no longer lived in fear. She had found happiness, while Nkem had been left with nothing but regret. One afternoon, Nkem walked to the river, staring at her reflection in the water. The face that once held beauty and pride was now tired and worn. Her bald head was a constant reminder of her cruelty, of the mistakes she could never undo. A single tear fell into the river, creating ripples that spread outward. She had spent so long trying to destroy Ekena, never realizing that in the end, she had only destroyed herself. Ekena's new life was nothing like the one she had left behind. For the first time, she was truly free, free from Nkem's cruelty, free from humiliation, free to be herself. She no longer had to hide her hair under a scarf or lower her eyes in fear. Instead, she walked with confidence, her long, magical hair flowing behind her like a river of gold. Elder Badu had taken her to a sacred place where she could learn about her gift. Wise healers and spiritual leaders welcomed her with open arms. They told her that her hair was more than just beautiful. It carried the power of the ancestors, a gift meant to help others. And so, Ekena trained. She learned about herbs, healing rituals, and the ancient wisdom of her people. She discovered that when she touched the sick, they felt stronger. When she braided the hair of the weak, they found new energy. Even her presence brought peace to those in pain. As months passed, word spread about the girl with the magical hair. People traveled from faraway villages to see her, to ask for her help. Mothers brought their sick children, and elders came seeking relief from their pains. Ekena helped them all, never turning anyone away. She had suffered so much, yet she chose kindness. She had been treated with cruelty, yet she gave love. One day, she was invited back to her village, not as a servant, not as the girl who was once humiliated, but as a healer, a woman of great power. When she arrived, the villagers no longer whispered behind her back. Instead, they bowed their heads in respect. Even those who had once ignored her now stood in awe. Nkem, now weak and alone, watched from afar, her heart heavy with regret. She had tried to destroy Ekena, but instead, Ekena had risen higher than anyone ever imagined. Ekena did not seek revenge. She did not hold on to bitterness. She simply smiled, knowing that her true victory was in finding happiness. She had turned her pain into strength, her suffering into wisdom, and so her story became legend. The tale of the girl with magical hair, who overcame cruelty and found her true purpose. A girl who had once been mistreated, but now stood as a beacon of hope.